Happy Monday, Angela.
Happy Monday.
How are things going?
Great.
It's Monday. So, we started a series about gut health, and so far we've covered gut psychology syndrome, food sensitivity testing, ulcers, and
gastroesophageal
reflux.
Yes.
Anything else that I missed? I think that's it. This is the last episode, fourth episode of what we're talking about. And today we're going to be talking about proteins.
That's right.
A common question that we get in the office. In fact, I've had a couple parents reaching out about certain protein powders that their kids, should they be doing it? Should they not be doing it? Which ones are good? Which ones are bad? So, what are we going to talk about today regarding proteins?
Yeah, let's talk about, there's so much out there. It can be really overwhelming as far as what's available out there on the market. You see everything from plant-based proteins to whey-based proteins. You see all sorts of things out there. So how do we know how to fuel our little athletes or our little bigger athletes?
Right. Getting bigger.
Right, getting bigger athletes and making sure that what they're getting is actually being utilized, right? And then turned over for cellular energy, because really that's what it's all about.
Absorbed.
Right? Absorption is huge,
Yes.
right? So one of the things that a powder does versus what a food does, I'm a very food-based conscious. Like I'd rather you get your nutrients in whole food first, right? However, when we're not getting our requirements or there's just a gap between the amount that we can eat, or even if our digestive system isn't functioning optimally, actually, protein powders can be a good way to actually deliver some really vital nutrients to the system that's going to help with performance, right?
Especially if you have a kid who's doesn't want to eat the healthiest to begin with.
Right.
Or if they don't want to eat breakfast, which is a huge meal of the day, setting them up for school. Proteins are an awesome way to do that.
Yes. Especially protein is the way to start your day, and even for your athletes, because it's going to set the tone, or just your growing kiddos, it's going to set the tone for the way that your blood sugar is going to be balanced through the entire day. It sets the stage, it sets the tone. What you eat first thing in the morning is going to actually determine blood sugar fluctuations throughout the day.
Especially at that age, after coming off of sleep, their body's doing so much activity while they're sleeping.
Right.
To re-nourish, refuel, and give that body something to utilize makes a huge difference.
It definitely does. So people start to ask, so what am I looking at? What am I looking for? So number one, we need to start reading labels, right? So we want to make sure if we're fueling our bodies, that we're getting the what do I say? You don't want denatured food. You don't want non-food. You want food, right? So number one, let's make sure that our protein is an actual food coming from an actual food source. So that would be number one. And number two, let's make sure that it's not just some chemical concoction, right? Don't you call it the chemical cocktail?
I call it something much worse than
you do?
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Chemical shitstorm is
Oh.
normally
That would probably be accurate.
when the kids are like, "Hey, can I have this?" and like I can't even pronounce one word. That's usually the phrase that pops up is, "No, you cannot."
Right. So if you are trying to pronounce acetylphane potassium or any type of hydrolyzed something,
Bicarbonate,
yes,
acid, yeah.
Right, exactly. Also, watch for hidden sugars. Anything that ends in OSE is actually a sugar. Sucralose, dextrose, like all of those things. So we definitely don't want sugar, laden protein, because they might as well have just had a bowl of cereal and defeating the whole purpose, right?
Yep.
So read the ingredients, make sure that you can pronounce every ingredient that is actually in your protein powder, right?
Sure. And so I guess it's a difference of talking between, are we talking protein powder or are we talking protein drink mix, right? Because I've seen both where it's, okay, I would like to have the kids to have something a little bit, especially my daughter, like have some kind of protein for breakfast.
Right.
And so there's a difference between, do we make our own smoothie and add a healthy protein to it, or is there a drink that we can just take that has some other vitamins and minerals, might taste good, but has protein? That is much harder to find than a healthy protein.
It is much harder to find. And in my observation, a lot of those are just, even the healthier versions of those protein drinks, they're just really laden with a lot of excess oils that we don't need, and excess sugar, there's excess, and I'm not so sure that all of those vitamins and minerals that they're putting in there are actually absorbable forms of vitamins and minerals.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. And that's usually when I'm saying, no, read the ingredients.
That's right.
There's not a single one I recognize.
That's right. I would much rather find a protein powder and make our own smoothie. So that's number one, is definitely, I think, DIY it for sure.
Okay. I think the biggest question that I have for you is whey versus plant versus, I guess rice would fall into plant, but I still feel like it's a little... Rice feels different to me than pea. So, let's talk about that, because that's a super...
Okay. So let's talk about...
I've historically been in the whey camp.
Right, exactly. And as long as you are not casein intolerant, and casein is the dairy molecule in all dairy, no matter what the animal is, as long as you don't have a casein issue, intolerance, whey would be a really good choice, as long as it is denatured, right? We got a lot of amazing naturally occurring things going on. The N-acetylcysteine that's in there, there's just lots of things that can really help. Again, making sure that it's not denatured. So what do I mean by that? I mean, in all protein across the board, no matter what, whether it's your pea protein, you guys have a lot of pumpkin seed going on out there, brown rice proteins, things like that, a lot of plant-based. Now we're seeing a lot of nuts and seeds and things like that too. Again, number one, making sure you're not intolerant to those things. Nuts and seeds, make sure you're not intolerant to that thing, right?
Would hemp be part of in that category?
Hemp is a beautiful plant protein if you're not, again, as long as you're not intolerant to it. Those are also great plant proteins.
Does that fall in the nut and seed category?
It does actually.
Okay.
It is. Shelled whole seeds. Yes, actually. So, okay. So in all of them across the board, no matter what they are, let me just say this. You want to make sure that when you read your label, that it just says hemp protein, brown rice protein, whey protein. And this is really important, because when you start lacing in words like isolated. Now, if you see something that says isolated whey protein, isolated soy protein, isolated whatever it is, you have to know that means that there is a chemical, there is chemistry going on there that is actually...
The protein's been stripped.
It's been chemically. It's stripped chemically. It's been isolated, right? So we need to look into, okay, what are we isolating those proteins with? And more times than not, they're serious toxic chemicals. Hexane being one of those chemicals that is used a lot to try to isolate that protein to make your product what it is. So anytime you see isolated protein of any kind, run the other direction, screaming down the street with your hair on fire, and don't ingest it. No isolated proteins, no hexane. Those are derivatives of petroleum, and you don't want that in your body.
Perfect. So if I'm a parent and I'm saying, should I get undenatured whey protein, or should I look at a healthy plant-based protein? what route do I go down?
I'm unfortunately a huge component of making sure first, that
So do a food sensitivity
do a food
test.
sensitivity test first, and then let's make that determination. Because based on the levels of the food sensitivity, I can actually see what your body is tolerating, or even absorbing or utilizing a lot more effectively than maybe what it's not utilizing more effectively, right? If none of those things come up, there's nothing wrong with actually rotating your proteins, right? Plant-based versus, whey-based. There is a theory that as far as when you break your food down, that your plant protein and your animal protein is actually broken down completely different. Okay. So yes.
Makes sense.
Right. It does. So as far as what that looks like once you ingest it, there's a whole onslaught of mechanisms.
So I've noticed when I've taken plant-based proteins that my stomach does not
exactly
agree with that as well. What's going on in that case?
You definitely have intolerances to things, and some of those things that are in their concentrated forms, like I experience the same thing. Like if I'm doing some kind of a pumpkin seed or even a pea protein, right, which I'm going to tell you, I'll do a little forecasting. I'm going to let you know that years from now we're going to go back, and this whole pea protein thing is going to be a huge controversy. I'm going to let you know that, right?
So what, you can't leave us hanging with
I'm
that.
So sorry.
Yeah, let's
right?
hear what's
right.
the.
So things like peas, or we've got these proteins that are actually carb dense proteins. So once they go in the body, first of all, beans are a really good example of that. I have a lot of my vegan friends who are like, well, I'll just actually make sure I'm getting plenty of my protein utilization in by taking in beans, right? So we look at beans and we realize, okay, so beans have, I think they're encrypted or camouflaged. That's the way that I say it, right? Beans, they don't want to be eaten because they have phytate inhibition in them. So phytate inhibition actually prevents you from being able to absorb the actual protein from that plant family. So they have phytate inhibition, and then they have lectins, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then on top of that, they're what we call.
So is that the case around the bean? That's the lectins, right?
Yeah, the anti-nutrients. Yeah, exactly. So we sometimes call them anti-nutrients too, because they also do that same thing. They render themselves unavailable to you actually absorbing their nutrients, which is really ironic. So yeah.
So peas do the same thing.
Yeah, peas do the same thing too. What else?
So if we have a powdered pea protein, like what is, you're saying that there's a high likelihood we're not actually absorbing that. And rice probably as well, right? So if we're looking at most plant-based proteins, it's not just one type of plant. It's usually a combo of rice, pea, what else?
Yeah, pumpkin seed. I see
Sometimes
a lot of
pumpkin
that
seed.
sometimes. Yeah.
Which are, in a lot of cases, very hard to digest.
They are very hard to digest, which is why you're getting an upset stomach, right? It makes sense, doesn't it?
So it's not just maybe I've got a sensitivity, which is causing inflammation.
Right.
I'm actually, even if I didn't have a sensitivity, I would have a harder time digesting that protein.
That's right.
Okay. So let's pretend I have we're going to find out in the next 2 weeks whether I have a dairy sensitivity.
Right.
Historically, I had a dairy sensitivity. So let's pretend I can't do whey. Why would I want to do plant?
Right. Well, some plant proteins have
Hemp. I have not noticed any digestive issues when I've included hemp protein.
Yeah, hemp protein.
Am I getting the absorption? Let's say I'm not sensitive to it, but is it as robust of a protein that my body can actually absorb and utilize?
Your body will be able to utilize, again, a very clean undenatured type of a protein, your body will be able to utilize that. And you know what? You can run this test for us and check your blood sugar actually to see how that's even impacting you on a blood sugar basis.
That's actually something that I would love to do more research on that, because I have heard that protein powders in general can really spike blood sugars.
And it's interesting because, again, this is why I am of the camp, if you can eat whole food first, do that first, right? Because this whole carb-dense protein thing that we're talking about, I hope I broke that down okay. What is a carb-dense protein? Okay. So carb-dense proteins are, once I put something in my mouth, my body has to make an informed decision, what am I going to do with this, right? So if I simplify it, I always simplify it into those two camps. Like, let's pretend we have only two hormones. One of them is called insulin. One of them is called glucagon. Glucagon's a releasing hormone. Insulin is a storage hormone, right? So when I eat, like, beans or some of these protein powder, my body, once it gets in there, says, oh, actually, let's go ahead and, you know what, this is actually going to provoke insulin. So then insulin comes up, right? That's what eating that plate of beans does to my vegan friends too, is because even though there is protein in the bean itself, the body recognizes it as a carbohydrate first over protein.
And a lot of plants-based proteins are like that.
That's right.
Whey? Is that historically, do you know, will that also tend to spike?
It stabilizes it. Also, you need to think about, what am I putting in my smoothie? Right? If you're putting a bunch of honey and maple syrup, right, and bananas, okay, and you're putting that in your smoothie, or I have seen people put chocolate milk in their smoothies. Like, so if, you know, first of all, let's figure out what is going in this smoothie first.
I'm laughing because I've done that.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. And why is my blood sugar so high? So not so much the protein itself, but it's like, what are you putting in there, right?
I get it.
You want to be conscious to keeping everything else in that smoothie low glycemic to gain the benefit from it.
Yeah. Also, as you're making a smoothie, this is a trick that I've been told, so that you don't denature the protein, is blend your smoothie, add your protein last on very light blend. Because if you dump your protein in and you're like high force, more than likely you're damaging the protein before you even ingest it.
Yeah, and a lot of the protein powders, even the whey protein powders out there on the market, they've done it for us before we even get it into our hands, unfortunately. Like when we're talking about like the way that they heat things up, and you know, just the pasteurization, the homogenization, all of those things. I can't say that word today, but yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess, you know, we both have kids. I know my kids need to have more protein. What's the best recommendation for that? I mean, obviously eat more whole food protein.
Yep, and then...
what about for breakfast? That's my biggest struggle with getting them to eat protein, is at breakfast. My son doesn't want to eat at all, and my daughter just wants to have carbs and sugar for breakfast.
And you know, when our kids are little, sometimes they really go through those, like, you know, that glucose, right? Like they're really utilizing it. They are a ball of energy, and you know, they can really do something with that, right? And in some cases, you know, more and more as I've kind of walked through life with my kids, and even myself, I've done a little bit more like leaning in and listening to what their body is doing. Some people are just natural intermittent fasters because it's just too hard on the system first thing in the morning. Their digestive system is not awake. They are not producing the gastric output they need to until they get moving around and things like that too, right? But just kind of figuring out, hey, you know, when's the first time that you do feel hungry, you know, and just leaning into that a little bit more. Sometimes I'll send Angela with a snack, a higher, a protein power, snack. Like I'll send him like with almonds, and we love those, the chomps. We use a lot of those. They're the turkey sticks and things like that. So if he's not feeling hungry right away, I'll send him off, and I'll be like, okay, when you're ready, right? Conscious, right? Because we've talked about this whole gut and psychology syndrome thing, and how their little digestive systems can lock down if they're experiencing the stress of the day, and then just trying to get them to eat when they're already, tense and stressed, and their digestive system's already tense and stressed, can really just unfortunately backfire, So, but if he's utilizing, and he'll do that sometimes because that'll be easier on his system, right? Utilizing the protein instead. Mitocore, right? Is that the one that, I love that one here in the office. The ingredients are really clean. It's very gentle on the stomach. And, he does really well with that.
I treat it as just a multi also.
Yes.
Because it's got so many other good things in it. So I've asked a lot of questions about kids because it's been an issue, but most adults, I would say, in general, don't get enough protein, and so especially if you're active, we have so many people who intermittent fast, and then they're trying to cut calories, so they'll have a salad, and then by the time they get to dinner, they're having nowhere near the adequate protein intake. They're trying to really cut calories, which will help lose weight to some extent, but it's also at an expense to not get enough protein. So, we want to have dividing our protein up multiple times through the day, correct? And typically at least 4 to 6 ounces of protein minimum. I've heard up to, if you take half your body weight, that's how many grams of protein that you're looking for. So, we're talking, for some people, anywhere from 70 to 100 grams of protein. That's way more protein than people are getting.
For sure.
So, if we're looking at protein from that perspective, is it really based on I think it's really based on our goals on what we're trying to do, right? Because some people, if I'm trying to get, based on my body weight, I'm not trying to get 100 grams of protein. But if I were, I don't want to eat giant, I can't, right?
Right.
So how do I, it's figuring out how to get more protein. I think, first of all, track how much of protein you're actually getting.
Yes, it is so eye-opening.
Right?
You
So
really
track your food for a week. There's tons of apps out there on how to do that.
Yes.
Track your food. You're going to be amazed at how much protein, how much sugar, how many carbs, how much fat you're getting actually. And even if you think you're eating pretty clean, it's going to add up, and you're going to be like, whoa, I'm not getting any protein. Even though I'm not getting a ton of calories, it's still mostly carbs, or it's mostly sugar. Or, wow, I had no idea those 3 Girl Scout cookies completely screwed up my whole day, right?
Right.
Because I've been having a couple of Girl Scout cookies, supporting those Girl Scouts. So I would say track what you're doing, so you know how much protein, you know where you're starting at.
Right. Know where your protein sources are coming from, even.
That's
it's very
huge.
Surprising, right? Sometimes we think we're getting a lot more than we actually are. People are like, oh, I started with a 3-egg omelet, and I think that's great, because you're upwards getting, more, 28 grams of protein, 7 grams of protein per egg, things like that. Just realizing, oh my gosh, your wild caught fish sources, those are upwards, you're eating 4 to 6 ounces, that's upwards to 28 grams of protein that you're getting. Just kind of start taking a look. Yes. Just start taking a look at, where are those coming from?
And then listening to your body.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your body's going to tell you what it thinks of that protein.
Right.
In most cases.
It really is. And the truth is, and we'll do another podcast on this, but it actually depends on what kind of like how your body oxidates things. Not all of us actually were, actually biochemically individually created to sustain that much protein. Actually, some of us actually do tolerate fats better, do tolerate a little bit more carbohydrates better. I don't want to put anybody in a box because it's not a one size fits all. It's also kind of being thoughtful about, okay, wow, like how am I hardwired?
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Okay, well, there we have it on protein.
Great.
At least a start on it.
Mm-hmm.
We could probably do a whole series on proteins, but next week we're going to talk about trigenics. And what that is. So trigenics is a new type of muscle work. Been getting pretty amazing results in the office. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that, try to verbally explain what I'm doing physically to people. So that's a little difficult to do, but we're going to make it work. Also, in the next couple of weeks, check out our VIP Facebook group called Up the Ladder, where we will be digging into my food intolerance test.
Yes.
And everyone can, we're going to do a Facebook Live where we'll do a breakdown. We'll show everyone the report and how you analyze that for someone.
That's right.
And we can laugh and cry and do all the things together about my food intolerance test. And we can talk about protein then too.
Sure.
Because based on what that shows,
that's right.
Is protein good? Protein bad? What kind? All the fun stuff. So otherwise, have a great week, everyone. We will see you next time.